There is a quiet contract that no one sees, no one signs, and no one forces you to obey, but it determines the entire direction of your life. It is the promises you make to yourself, not the promises you make to others, not the commitments you announce publicly, not the goals you post online, but the small private agreements you make in your own mind and whether you keep them or break them. And here is a truth most people never fully grasp. Your life does not change when you make big promises. Your life changes when you start keeping small ones. Because success is not built on motivation. It is built on integrity with yourself. And integrity simply means this: you do what you said you would do even when no one is watching. Most people think their biggest problem is a lack of opportunity, a lack of resources, or a lack of timing. But if you look closely, the real problem is far simpler and far more uncomfortable. They do not trust themselves. And why would they? They break promises all day long. I will wake up early tomorrow, I will start on Monday. I will stop this habit, I will focus from now on. And when the moment comes, they negotiate with themselves, just 5 more minutes, just 1 more day, just this once. And slowly, without even noticing it, they begin to lose the most important relationship in their life, the relationship with themselves. Because every broken promise sends a message to your mind: you cannot be trusted. And once your mind believes that, discipline becomes harder, confidence becomes weaker, and progress becomes slower. Not because you are incapable, but because you are inconsistent. Now understand something powerful: self-respect is not something you think. It is something you build. And you build it every time you do what you said you would do. Even when it is uncomfortable. Even when no one praises you. Even when you do not feel like it. Because every kept promise adds a deposit into your character. And every broken promise withdraws from it. So the question is not, do you have big dreams? The question is, do you have small disciplines? Because big dreams without discipline remain imagination. But small disciplines repeated daily become destiny. Think about the strongest people you admire. They are not necessarily the most talented. They are not always the most educated. They are not always the most gifted. But they are consistent. They do what they said they would do long after the excitement has faded. And that is where most people fail. They can start with passion. They can begin with energy. They can even go strong for a few days. But when the emotion disappears, so does their commitment. And here is the truth about life. Life does not reward emotion. It rewards consistency. Let's go deeper. Every time you keep a promise to yourself, something invisible happens inside you. You begin to trust your own voice. And when you trust your own voice, you no longer need external motivation. You no longer need someone to push you every day. You no longer need constant inspiration. Because discipline becomes your identity, not your mood. You stop saying, I have to do this. And you start saying, this is who I am. And that shift changes everything. Now consider the opposite. Every time you break a promise to yourself, something else happens quietly. You start lowering your standards. You start accepting less from yourself. You begin to believe that later is acceptable. And tomorrow becomes your favorite word. But tomorrow never arrives. It is always one day away, just far enough to keep your dreams alive, but never close enough to force action. And slowly years pass. Not because life stopped you, but because you stopped keeping promises to yourself. There is a moment in every person's life when they must decide, will I continue to live as I feel, or will I live as I decide? Feelings are unstable. They change with sleep, weather, mood, and circumstance. But decisions are powerful. They create direction. And the strongest decision you can ever make is this: I will keep my word to myself, no matter how small the promise is. If you said you will read 10 pages, read them. If you said you will exercise, do it. If you said you will start, start. If you said you will stop, stop. Because your future is not shaped by what you do once. It is shaped by what you repeat when no one is forcing you. And here is something even deeper. The more you keep promises to yourself, the easier life becomes. Not because life gets softer, but because you become stronger. Discipline removes chaos. Consistency removes confusion. Integrity removes self-doubt. And when self-doubt disappears, confidence is no longer something you search for, it becomes something you carry. At some point, you must stop asking, how do I stay motivated? And start asking, how do I stay true? Because motivation is temporary, but trust is permanent. And the greatest success in life is not money, status, or recognition. It is being able to look at yourself in the mirror and say, I trust you. That is a rare form of success. And it is available to anyone willing to pay the price of small daily discipline. So start small. Do not wait for a massive transformation. Just choose one promise today, a simple one, a realistic one, a quiet one, and keep it. Then tomorrow keep another, and the next day another. because slowly something powerful begins to happen. You stop being someone who tries, and you become someone who follows through. And that is the beginning of a different life. A life built not on wishes, but on trust. Not on intentions, but on action. Not on promises made, but on promises kept. And when you reach that level, you will understand something most people never learn. Success was never complicated. It was always about keeping your word, especially when it was hardest to keep. Because in the end, the person you must never lie to is yourself. Self-trust is the invisible foundation upon which every strong character is built. It is not something that is given to you by others, nor is it something that appears overnight. It is developed quietly, gradually, and consistently through the simple act of keeping promises you make to yourself. Every time you decide to do something, no matter how small, and actually follow through, you are sending a powerful message to your mind. I can rely on myself. Over time, this message becomes your identity. Most people underestimate how deeply self-trust influences their entire life. They think confidence comes from talent, education, or external validation. But in reality, confidence is simply the result of repeated evidence that you can depend on your own actions. When you consistently wake up when you said you would, complete the task you planned, or resist the temptation you promised to avoid, you are building a silent record of reliability within yourself. That record becomes the root of your confidence. You no longer need to question whether you will follow through, because your past actions have already answered that question for you. On the other hand, when self-trust is weak, everything becomes difficult. Even simple tasks feel heavy. Decisions feel uncertain. You begin to doubt your ability before you even start. Why? Because your mind remembers all the times you said, I will do it, and didn't. Each broken promise becomes a small crack in your inner foundation. At first, these cracks seem harmless, but over time, they widen. You begin to negotiate with yourself more often, delay actions more easily, and question your own discipline. This is not a lack of ability, it is a lack of trust in your own ability. Self-trust also determines how you handle challenges. When you trust yourself, you approach difficulties with calm confidence. You know that even if things are hard, you will not quit on yourself. But when self-trust is weak, challenges feel overwhelming. You are not just fighting the problem in front of you, you are also fighting your own doubt. That double burden makes progress slow and exhausting. The powerful truth is that self-trust is rebuilt in the same way it is lost through action. You do not rebuild it by thinking differently or hoping for change. You rebuild it by doing what you said you would do repeatedly, even when it feels small or insignificant. Every kept promise is like depositing strength into your character. At first, the change feels invisible. But over time, you notice a shift. Hesitation becomes action, doubt becomes clarity, and fear becomes discipline. This is why small commitments matter so much. People often ignore them because they seem too simple to be important. But simplicity is exactly what makes them powerful. When you commit to something easy and still fail to do it, you damage your trust in yourself more than you realize. And when you commit to something small and complete it consistently, you rebuild that trust at a deep level. A person with strong self-trust does not rely on motivation. They rely on identity. They do not ask, do I feel like doing this? They ask, is this what I said I would do? That shift in thinking changes everything. Life becomes less about emotional fluctuation and more about steady direction. Ultimately, self-trust is not just about productivity or discipline. It is about freedom. When you trust yourself completely, you are no longer controlled by hesitation, fear, or procrastination. You move with clarity. You act with confidence. And you build a life that reflects not just your dreams, but your reliability in pursuing them. Small commitments are often ignored because they appear insignificant. They don't look powerful at first glance, and they rarely bring immediate recognition or reward. But in reality, they are the hidden architecture of every successful life. The size of the commitment is not what determines its value, the consistency of keeping it does. Life does not transform in one dramatic moment. It transforms through repeated small actions that seem ordinary in the beginning but become extraordinary over time. Most people misunderstand progress. They believe big success comes from big moves, sudden breakthroughs, or life-changing decisions. But real progress is far quieter. It is built in the early mornings when you wake up on time, even when you don't feel like it. It is built in the moments when you choose discipline over comfort, focus over distraction, and action over delay. These are small choices, but they carry enormous weight because they shape your identity through repetition. When you keep a small promise to yourself, something powerful happens inside your mind. You begin to develop evidence that you are reliable. That evidence is more important than any motivation or external encouragement. Motivation fades, but evidence remains. And when your mind has enough evidence that you can trust yourself, your behavior begins to change naturally. You stop negotiating with yourself as often. You stop overthinking simple decisions. You stop delaying actions that matter. Instead, you begin to act with quiet certainty. On the other hand, ignoring small commitments creates a very different outcome. When you repeatedly fail to do small things you promised would be easy, you start to weaken your internal discipline. Your mind begins to learn that your words are flexible, that what you say does not always have to match what you do. And once that pattern is established, it slowly expands into larger areas of your life. If you cannot keep small promises, your mind assumes you will not keep big ones either. This creates hesitation, procrastination, and inconsistency. What makes small commitments so powerful is their frequency. They appear every day. They are not rare events. They are constant opportunities to either strengthen or weaken your self-discipline. Each time you choose correctly, you are shaping your character. And character is not built in moments of comfort, it is built in moments of decision, especially when no one is watching and no one is praising you. There is also a compounding effect at work. One small disciplined action may not seem like much, but repeated over weeks and months, it begins to reshape your entire behavior pattern. For example, choosing to read a few pages daily may not feel transformative on day one, but over time, it expands your thinking, improves your focus, and strengthens your learning ability. The same applies to exercise, planning, waking up early, or staying focused on important tasks. Each small action adds up quietly until one day you realize you are no longer the same person who started. The danger lies in underestimating these small actions. Because they feel easy, people assume they are optional. Because they feel simple, people assume they are not important. But life does not measure importance by intensity, it measures it by repetition. What you repeat becomes your reality. Another important truth is that small commitments build emotional strength. Every time you follow through on something simple, you strengthen your ability to act regardless of mood. This is critical because most people live emotionally driven lives. If they feel good, they act. If they don't feel good, they delay. But success belongs to those who act regardless of emotional state. And that ability is trained through small, repeated discipline. Eventually, something remarkable happens. You begin to respect yourself more. Not because others praise you, but because you know you keep your word. This self-respect becomes a powerful force. It reduces internal conflict. It increases clarity. It strengthens confidence. And most importantly, it builds momentum. In the end, small commitments are not small at all. They are the training ground of greatness. They are the daily votes you cast for the person you are becoming. And over time, those votes decide your future far more than any single decision ever could. Every time a person breaks a promise to themselves, something subtle but powerful happens inside their identity. It may not show immediate consequences and there may be no external punishment, but internally, a shift begins. The mind quietly registers that your word is not absolute, that your decisions can be bent, delayed, or abandoned without resistance. And once this pattern starts forming, it slowly shapes how you see yourself. At first, broken promises seem harmless. You tell yourself you will start tomorrow, and when tomorrow comes, you delay again. You decide to wake up early, but the comfort of the bed wins. You plan to focus, but distractions take over. Each time it feels small. Each time it feels forgivable. But the mind does not categorize these moments as isolated incidents. It connects them. It builds a pattern. And that pattern becomes your identity. The most damaging effect of broken promises is not the failure itself, it is the erosion of self-belief. When you repeatedly fail to do what you said you would do, your subconscious mind begins to expect failure. Even before you start, it whispers doubt. You won't follow through anyway. And once this inner voice becomes strong, it influences every decision you make. You hesitate more. You delay more. You doubt more, not because you lack ability, but because you lack internal trust. This is how procrastination is born. It is not simply laziness. It is a learned behavior rooted in repeated broken commitments. Every unfinished task, every ignored plan, every abandoned goal strengthens the habit of delay. Over time, the mind becomes trained to avoid effort. Not because effort is impossible, but because follow-through has become unreliable. Broken promises also weaken discipline. Discipline is not a natural trait, it is built through repetition. When you break commitments to yourself, you are essentially teaching your mind that discipline is optional. And once discipline becomes optional, consistency disappears. Without consistency, even the most powerful goals remain unfinished ideas. Another hidden cost of breaking promises is emotional instability. When you do not keep your word to yourself, you often carry a quiet sense of guilt or frustration, even if you don't consciously acknowledge it. You may try to ignore it, but it lingers in the background. This emotional weight reduces clarity and focus. It becomes harder to concentrate, harder to stay motivated, and harder to maintain direction, because part of your energy is constantly tied up in unresolved internal conflict. Over time, this pattern affects how you see your future. A person who repeatedly breaks promises begins to lower their expectations. They stop dreaming boldly, not because dreams are impossible, but because deep down they do not trust themselves to pursue them. They begin to settle for less, not due to lack of opportunity, but due to lack of self-belief. Perhaps the most dangerous part of broken promises is how normal they become. What once felt like failure slowly becomes routine. You stop feeling discomfort when you break a promise. You stop questioning it. And when that happens, change becomes extremely difficult because there is no longer any internal resistance pushing you toward improvement. But the truth is, this pattern can be reversed. Just as broken promises weaken you, kept promises rebuild you. Every time you do what you said you would do, even in small ways, you repair the trust within yourself. Slowly, the internal voice changes. Instead of doubt, it begins to say, you can rely on yourself. Instead of hesitation, it encourages action. The transformation begins when you stop ignoring small failures and start respecting small commitments. Because it is in these small moments that identity is shaped. A person does not suddenly become disciplined or undisciplined. They become it gradually through repetition of either keeping or breaking promises. In the end, broken promises are not just about missed actions, they are about identity erosion. They slowly disconnect you from your own potential. But the moment you choose to change that pattern, even in the smallest way, you begin the process of rebuilding something far more valuable than success itself: self-trust. Motivation is often misunderstood as the driving force behind success, but in reality, it is one of the most unreliable forces a person can depend on. It comes and goes like weather. Some days it feels strong and unstoppable, and other days it disappears completely without warning. If a person builds their life on motivation alone, they will always find themselves starting and stopping, rising and falling, progressing for a moment and then retreating again. This is why consistency becomes far more powerful than motivation. It is stable, predictable, and independent of emotional conditions. Consistency means doing what needs to be done regardless of how you feel. It is the ability to show up even when excitement is gone, even when energy is low, and even when results are not immediate. This is where real success is built not in bursts of inspiration, but in steady, repeated action. People often admire great results, but fail to see the quiet discipline behind them. What looks like talent or luck is usually the outcome of consistent effort over time. The difference between motivated people and consistent people is not ability, but approach. A motivated person waits to feel ready. A consistent person decides in advance what must be done and follows through regardless of feeling. This simple difference determines long-term outcomes. Motivation depends on emotion, consistency depends on decision. And decisions are far stronger than emotions because they create structure even when feelings fluctuate. One of the most powerful aspects of consistency is that it removes decision fatigue. When you are consistent, you no longer waste energy debating whether or not to act. You already know what you are supposed to do. This clarity reduces internal conflict and increases productivity. Instead of negotiating with yourself every day, you simply follow a pattern. And over time, that pattern becomes your identity. Consistency also builds momentum. Small, repeated actions create a rhythm in life. At first, progress may feel slow and unnoticeable, but as actions accumulate, they begin to compound. Just like drops of water can eventually fill a container, small, consistent efforts eventually create significant transformation. The key is not intensity, but repetition. Many people fail not because they lack effort, but because they stop too soon. Another important truth is that consistency strengthens discipline. Every time you act consistently, you reinforce the habit of follow-through. This reduces reliance on external motivation and increases internal stability. You begin to act out of habit rather than emotion. And when actions become habitual, success becomes more predictable. Consistency also builds self-respect. Each time you do what you said you would do, you reinforce the belief that you can rely on yourself. This self-respect becomes a powerful internal motivator. It is no longer about proving something to others, it becomes about honoring your own standards. And once self-respect is established, it becomes much harder to break your own commitments. On the other hand, relying only on motivation leads to inconsistency. It creates cycles of enthusiasm followed by inactivity. A person may start strong, feel inspired, and take action for a short period. But as soon as motivation fades, so does progress. This cycle repeats itself until frustration builds, and eventually, many people give up not because the goal was impossible, but because their approach was unstable. Consistency breaks this cycle. It removes the need for constant emotional highs and replaces them with steady action. It teaches the mind that progress does not depend on how you feel, but on what you decide. This shift is what separates those who achieve long-term success from those who only experience short-term bursts of effort. Ultimately, consistency transforms identity. A consistent person does not say, "I am trying to be disciplined." They simply are disciplined because their actions reflect it daily. Over time, this identity becomes stronger than any external influence. And when identity is strong, behavior naturally follows. In the end, motivation may start the journey, but it is consistency that finishes it. Those who learn to act consistently, even in the absence of motivation, eventually build a life that reflects stability, growth, and lasting success. In conclusion, the true secret to lasting success is not found in temporary bursts of motivation, but in the steady power of consistency. Motivation may inspire you to begin, but it cannot carry you through the challenges, delays, and moments of doubt that life inevitably brings. It is consistency that keeps you moving forward when excitement fades and circumstances become difficult. When you choose to act regularly, regardless of how you feel, you begin to build a strong foundation of discipline, self-trust, and inner stability. Every repeated action strengthens your identity and brings you closer to the person you are capable of becoming. Over time, these small, consistent efforts compound into remarkable results that no single moment of motivation could ever achieve. Ultimately, success belongs to those who understand that progress is not about intensity, but about persistence. It is not about doing something once with great energy, but about doing the right things again and again with quiet determination. When consistency becomes your way of life, success is no longer a distant goal, it becomes a natural outcome.